Hello everyone, my name is Monica Harvey and welcome to my home. I have been asked to read you a story celebrating National Book Day, and I will read you a story, and this story is written by a very well-known writer, Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl wrote a whole lot of stories for children that were very, very popular in England, and I think perhaps you have seen some of these stories in a film, in a video. For instance, one of them is Matilda. The other is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and many others. But I was thinking that these are really stories for children. So, as I'm sure you will appreciate, listening to a story for adults, which is very, very special and very intriguing. And so, I'll begin by telling you part of the story, and then I'll read the second part, and at the end you have to guess what happened. Right? Right. Mrs. Forbes was always worried about being late. She was always half an hour early because she was worried about arriving late at the cinema, at the theater, to catch a train, to a party. She was always worried. And she was so worried that every time this happened, she had a little twitch here in her eye, showing how very nervous she was. Her husband, Mr. Foster, didn't seem to realize this, or did he? He was always late. Only 2 minutes late, but that was enough to make Mrs. Foster so nervous. Now, the rest of the time, Mrs. Foster was a very nice lady and a very loyal wife. Mr. and Mrs. Foster lived in a very large house in New York on East 62nd Street in New York. And it was such a large house that they had a lift, or an elevator, as Americans call it. And they had 4 servants: the butler, Mr. Walker, the cook, and 2 more servants. And it was a very large house, but a very empty house. By empty, I mean it was empty of people, empty of friends. 2 lived by themselves, very, very lonely life. Mr. Foster didn't work anymore because he was 70 years old. But he used to go to his club, and poor Mrs. Foster did very little except be at home and walk around the house. Now, that morning was a very special morning because everyone was running around the house. What was happening? Mrs. Foster took her elevator at the second floor, because that's where her bedroom was, half an hour early. That means she was downstairs at 8:30. And she had on her old black fur coat and her old black hat, and she was walking around all the rooms all the time, asking the butler what time it is. What time is it? Walker, please. 9:15, madam. 9:10, madam. 9:00, madam. Don't worry, madam. You won't be late for your flight. But she was very, very worried, because this was a very special flight, you see. She was going off to Paris, and she had had a lot of trouble to get her husband to say yes, to let her go to Paris. She had a daughter, you see, a daughter she loved, and she was married to a Frenchman. Now, she didn't like the Frenchman very much, but they had 3 children. 3 children she had never met. Imagine. She had lots of pictures, lots of pictures all over the house. And she kept looking at these pictures and thinking the wonderful things she would do with these children if they lived near. Of course, she would take them out, she would buy them presents, she would give them candies to eat. But of course, they lived in Paris. And she even thought, this was a very disloyal thought, that she could go and live in Paris. But of course, Mr. Foster would never leave New York. So that was out of the question. Anyhow, she had persuaded Mr. Foster that she was going to Paris for 6 weeks. That's why the house was in such a flurry. I mean, the maids were putting dust sheets all over the place, all over the furniture. The butler was running around, she was running around. They were all getting ready for this trip to Paris. The only one who did not appear was Mr. Foster. Mr. Foster was in his studio, and he just didn't seem to worry. Finally, he came out at about 9:20. Oh, I'll never catch my plane now. This she thought. She didn't tell him because she never said anything. I have to be at the airport in half an hour early, and from here, the airport takes an hour. So, and my plane leaves at 11. I'll never arrive. He just came out of the room for his studio feeling very relaxed. And she said, "Walker, do put Mr. Foster's overcoat on." And she looked at the 70-year-old man, who was not very tall. Actually, he was short, yes, and with a very long face and a beard. And she felt desperate. And then he said, "Just a minute, I have to go and wash my hands." Ah, poor Mrs. Foster. You can imagine. Well, anyhow, out he came. He put on his overcoat, and she rushed to the car that was waiting outside, and he walked down the steps very slowly, sniffing at the air, saying, "I think there's going to be a fog." He got into the car and said to her, "I don't think your plane will leave. There's going to be a fog." "Oh dear. Driver, drive on," she said. And the driver drove on to the airport. And as they were going to the airport, they noticed that the traffic was going slowly and very slowly and much more slowly. And that was true. There was a fog, but a deep, deep fog. And you could hardly see the car in front of you. So you see, he said, get used to the idea that you will never catch that plane. You won't, because the plane will never leave in the middle of a fog. Oh, she said, don't say anything, please. A little later, they did arrive at the airport. She jumped out of the car and rushed into the airport and went straight to the desk, her airway desk. And there were a lot of people around mumbling and annoyed and this and that. And when she asked the name, the clerk said, sorry, madam, but your plane can't leave. It's in the middle of the fog. We're not allowed to leave. Oh dear, she said, what shall I do if I go home? He'll never let me go to Paris again. All this she was saying to herself. But the clerk said, madam, don't go, stay, because as soon as the fog lifts, the plane will fly, and you can fly. Ah, that gave her hope. She rushed back to the car, and she said, look, dear, I have to stay because there is a chance that the fog will lift and I can go. So he said, can the driver take me back home? Yes, the driver said, no worry. All right, so where's your luggage, he said. And she said, oh, the driver took it to the clerk, to the airplane clerk. Ah, all right, then it's settled. She tried to give him a kiss. She tried to give him a kiss. It was a very small kiss because in general he didn't like kisses very much. Then she asked, will you write to me? And he said, you know I don't like writing unless it's something very, very important. All right, she said, don't worry, don't write. Bye-bye, darling. And off she went back into the airport. And she sat and waited and waited. Every half an hour, she went straight to the desk and asked the clerk, when is the plane to Paris leaving? Not yet, madam. I'm sorry. Oh dear. At 6 o'clock, finally, the clerk said, look, the plane to Paris has been delayed till tomorrow morning at 11. Oh dear, she said, what am I going to do? She sat back in her seat and thought, if I go back, I'll never be able to fly. Perhaps I can get a room and sleep, or sleep here at the airport. And then she realized that she was an old woman and she was very tired and she couldn't do that. So in the end, she called her husband. And he was at home. He was just about to leave for the club. And she said to him, the plane didn't leave. It's leaving tomorrow at 11. I told you so, he said. All right, come home. But remember, I asked all the staff, means all the servants, to leave for 6 weeks because I'm going to be staying at the club and you're not going to be here, so they can all go for a rest and I'll pay them half wages. So there's nothing here, there's no one here, and there's no food here. Oh dear, she said, what can I do? Oh, silly woman, he said, have a sandwich somewhere and a coffee and then take a taxi and come home. All right, she said, and she did that. But of course, again, the traffic was very slow, and when she got home, he was there, and apparently he had something to eat in a nearby restaurant or something, and she said, will you be ready tomorrow? Oh yes, he said, I already ordered a car for 9. And are you coming to the airport with me again? No, he said. No, I'm not going to the airport with you again, but I want you to leave me at the club on your way to the airport. Oh, she said, but the club is in the center of town, way away from the airport. Oh, come on, silly. Don't you want to take me to the airport? Yes, darling, yes, I do, she said. But as she was very tired, she got into the lift and went off to her bedroom on the 2nd floor to sleep. And so did he, somewhere. He had another bedroom somewhere in the house. Next morning, you can imagine, 8:30, Mrs. Foster was back. She got out of the lift in her black coat, her black hat, and was ready. But of course, he wasn't. So she walked and walked and walked up and down the house, up and down the house. She looked out of the window, and yes, at 9 o'clock, the car was there. So she waited and waited and waited. Where was Mr. Foster? He was in his room, and he just never appeared until 9:15, and he just looked at her and said, "Are you ready, dear?" And he seemed to smile when he saw that her eye was twitching. Remember, I told you that when she was very nervous, her eye twitched. Yes, I'm ready. Let's go, let's get into the car. Just a minute, he said. I have to get my cigars. Oh, she was, desperate. He came along a couple of minutes later, and they got into the car. And just as they were leaving, he said, "Where's the little white box?" "What little white box?" said Mrs. Foster. "The one I bought for Helen, our daughter. I wanted you to take that to Paris from me." But I didn't see any white box. No, I had it in my hand. So they started looking around. He looked in his pockets, but he couldn't find it. So he said, I know where I left it. I left it in the bedroom. I'll just go and get it. And he dashed out of the car. As she was looking around the car, she suddenly saw a little white box between the 2 seats of the car. So she decided to rush out, call him, and tell him that she found the box, to hurry up. So she did that. She rushed out of the car, up the steps, and rang the bell. Nobody answered. She tried the door. The door was locked. So she took out her key, and just as she was putting her key into the lock, she heard some noises coming from the house. So she put her ear close to the door, and she heard more noises coming out. She suddenly smiled, turned round, rushed out, rushed down the steps and into the taxi. And now, from there on, I'll I'll read to you. Then all at once she came to life again. "It's too late," she cried to the driver. "I can't wait for him. I simply can't. I'll miss my plane." "Hurry now, driver, hurry to the airport." The driver, if he had been watching her, might have noticed that her face had turned absolutely white and that her whole expression had suddenly changed. There was no longer that rather soft and stupid look. A strange hardness had settled on her face. The little mouth was now tight and thin. Her eyes were bright, and the voice, when she spoke, carried a new tone of decision. "Hurry, driver, hurry." "Isn't your husband traveling with you?" the man asked, astonished. "Certainly not. I was only going to drop him at his club." "Don't sit there talking, man. Get on your way. I've got to catch a plane to Paris." The man drove fast all the way, and she caught her plane with a few minutes to spare. Soon she was high up over the Atlantic, sitting back comfortably in her seat, listening to the sound of engines, flying to Paris at last. The new confidence was still with her. She felt extremely strong and, in a strange sort of way, wonderful. She was a little breathless with it all, but this was from the pure astonishment of what she had done. And as the plane flew farther and farther away from New York and East 62nd Street, a great sense of calmness began to settle upon her. By the time she reached Paris, she was just as strong and cool and calm as you could wish. She met her grandchildren, and they were even more beautiful than in the photographs. They were so beautiful. Every day she took them for walks and fed them cakes and bought them presents and told them charming stories. Once a week, on Tuesdays, she wrote a letter to her husband, a nice long letter full of news, which always ended with the same words: "Now be sure to take your meals regularly, dear, although I know you won't when I'm not with you." When the 6 weeks were up, everybody was sad. She had to return to America. The children, her daughter, even the Frenchman. Everybody, that is, except her. Surprisingly, she didn't seem to mind so much as one might imagine. And when she kissed them all goodbye, there was something in her manner and in the things she said that showed the possibility of a return in the not too distant future. However, like the faithful wife she was, she didn't stay a minute longer. 6 weeks, and she was on her plane back to New York. Arriving at New York Airport, Mrs. Foster was surprised that there was no car waiting for her. Even a little amused, I think, but she was calm, and she got into a taxi to drive home. New York was colder than Paris, and there were lumps of dirty snow in the streets. The taxi stopped in front of the house on 62nd Street, and Mrs. Foster persuaded the taximan to carry her heavy luggage up the steps to the door. When she got there, she paid him, and then she waited and rang the bell and waited. And there was no answer. And she rang the bell again, and she heard the bell ringing in the kitchen. And she thought, how funny. But then she took out her key and she opened the door herself. And the first thing she saw was a great pile of mail lying on the floor. Even her letters were there that had been put in through the letter box. Now that was strange, because he had promised that he would go regularly to the house and pick up the mail. The place was very dark and cold. A dust sheet was still covering the clock. There was a faint, strange smell in the air. She had never smelled before. She walked quickly across the hall and disappeared for a moment round the corner to the left at the back. There was something purposeful in her actions, and when she returned a few seconds later, there was a faint look of satisfaction on her face. She paused in the center of the hall, wondering what to do. Then she went into his study and she found his address book. And after hunting through it, she found the name of the people who cared for the lift. "Hello," she said. "Listen, this is number 9 East 62nd Street. "Yes, that's right. Could you send someone around as soon as possible, do you think?" "Yes, it seems to be stuck between the 2nd and 3rd floor. At least that's what the dial says." "Right away? Oh, that's very kind of you. You see, my legs aren't too good for walking up a lot of stairs. Thank you so much. Goodbye." She replaced the receiver, and there, at her husband's desk, patiently waited for the man to come along and repair the elevator. Now that's the end of the story. What do you think happened? Why was the elevator between the 2nd and 3rd floor? Why had it stopped there? Why was all the mail on the floor when she arrived? Why hadn't he sent a car for her? Can you imagine what happened? Do you remember when she went up the stairs and heard strange noises? Right. You have to find the clue to the end of this story. What really happened in 9 East 62nd Avenue, the home of Mr. and Mrs. Foster. Right, and the name of the story is The Way Up to Heaven. Right, thank you so much. Now work with your friends and with your teachers and find a solution to this very intriguing story by Roald Dahl. Thank you.